Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Be the Standard. Appreciate your return. And today we're going to be talking about effective and ineffective leadership. Before we get started, go ahead, like and subscribe to the podcast. We are now on Rumble, YouTube, and Spotify, as you know. Go ahead and check us out on Instagram at Be the Standard is the business page. Denny underscore Paul 12 is mine, and Mike Burns 1. Also, check us out on LinkedIn at Be the Standard Podcast. We're there as well. And so I'm going to hop right into it here with effective and ineffective leadership. And essentially, what is leadership, right? It is the ability to inspire, influence, and guide others toward a common goal and purpose.
That would be the textbook
That
definition.
is the textbook definition. However, we're going to get into, actually, Mike, before we get started, actually, I want to know from your perspective, you've been a senior leader now in the military for a number of years.
Yeah.
What's leadership mean to you?
Well, definitely not the textbook version, right?
Right.
So, I mean, what I've learned over the years is really being able to communicate well, right? I think leadership comes out of communication, big time, and really being able to communicate the goal of the organization, whatever it is, and be able to, make sure that people understand, uh, you know, like you take their input, but you take the information and you do what's best with it, right? So, I'm sure you're going to get into. I don't know what you got lined up to talk about there, but there's a lot of different ways that you can do this wrong, and a lot of different ways. I would say there's not that many ways to do it right, right? So, so to me, it's literally just what I've learned because I've made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, anyone knows who's come up. I've been around a long time doing this is really effective communication, listening, right? Really listening to people, and taking the information that you're given and making the best decision with it, and not making decisions in a bubble. I know it's kind of convoluted what I just said there, but that's probably the best way I can put it together because it's anytime you ask any leader that, I feel like you're gonna get a weird answer, and that's my weird answer. So
Yeah, no, and it's a good answer. I mean, all of that was accurate in my opinion. Like you said, I think people's definitions and variations of what leadership looks like is all different. And I don't think I had a clear definition of what that looked like. And I wasn't going to bring this up until at the end. I was going to say, if you want a good book on leadership, and this is what I did, I listened to it, but Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink and Leif Baden.
it's a good one.
And when I listened to it, at the time when I listened to it, I was commuting back and forth to Oracle, and that ride is about an hour. And so many good principles of leadership in there, but the title of the book is Extreme Ownership. And when you look at leadership from that through that lens of extreme ownership, I think that really gives you everything you need to know if you're going to define leadership. And ultimately, I think what that means is, when you think about extreme ownership, you're talking about everything good and bad that happens within the team is your fault.
Yep.
When you're in charge of, guiding and coaching and developing other people in a particular either skill set or profession, I think that you own it all. You own everything that's good. You own all the failures. You own all the successes. And I think it's more important that a good leader owns the failures.
Yeah, I think for sure.
And gives the sorry, I hate to cut you off. And gives the credit for the successes to the team.
Absolutely. That's all I was going to say, Dan, is like, the leader takes responsibility for the failures and gives the praise to the team who did perform the work, right? So, and that's definitely the way it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just in preparing for this episode, I went through and I was like kind of putting together, some of my own, some research and just things that I wanted to talk about. And, what I did was I put together basically just some key components of leadership. And you touched upon the first one, and that's probably the most important or definitely up there is the effective communication.
Yep.
Because you can't be universal in your communication when you're a leader. You have to be able to effectively communicate with each member of your team.
Yep.
Because they talk about it in relationships all the time about a love language, how you receive love, how you're supposed to give love, right? How the person you're with receives love. It's the same way in a relationship with either your peers or your subordinates, right? It's all different. You can't lead one guy the exact same way that you lead another guy. Yeah, so you can't lead two people exactly the same way, right? You have different personalities, different mindsets, and then ultimately you have different skill sets.
Right.
So you're coaching and leading differently for each person.
But also, just to expand on that, is that people receive information differently than other people do.
Right.
So sometimes the way you communicate your message to someone might be received differently than someone else. So then I feel like an experienced leader or an immature leader would keep trying to say the same thing, trying to trying to think they're going to get a different result, and never trying to change up the way they communicated it, and wonder and yell at the person, thinking because well, I know what I'm saying.
Mhm.
You know, you must know
How
what
do
I'm
you
saying.
not know
How
what
do
I'm
you
saying?
not know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then as you mature as a leader, you start to realize, like, oh, well, maybe it's the way I'm communicating it. Let me adjust my leadership. Let me adjust, excuse me, on my communication to this individual.
Yeah, and I'll sit here, with some humility and say that I made that mistake with
We all have. Come on.
when I was no, I know, and we all do, right? Especially when you're early on in your career as a leader. But at one time in particular, I can think of when I was leading my team, and I had one guy in particular that perhaps I couldn't be as hard on, right? Because he just didn't respond to that.
Right.
So if he didn't respond to that, so if I were to yell at him or I were to kind of call him out in front of the team, he's just not going to respond. So I had to learn that that just wasn't an effective way to communicate with him.
Yep.
It's the military, so I think sometimes we just like to say, this is how it is and you have to deal with it. Yeah, so like one time in particular where, I had to just, and I'll show some humility here, where I had to learn a lesson that, you can't effectively, or you can't communicate with your team and each team member the same, universally, right? I had one guy in particular that just didn't respond to the harder leadership, the more aggressive style of leadership that I sometimes had, as a leader in the military. So I had to just make adjustments with him, and I think sometimes in the military, we just kind of say, or we like to say, the military's hard. This is just how it is, and
Yeah.
you you're just gonna perform based off of how I lead you, and it just doesn't work that way. And
Right.
you have to make adjustments, and to your team and to your guys, because ultimately um, it's on you to make sure that they're performing to the standard.
Right. So, just kind of was saying before, like talking about an immature leader who keeps, saying the same thing over and over and over
Mhm.
again, and wondering why they don't get it, and then we end up, lashing out at them, and maybe didn't realize maybe I'm not communicating this the right way, and then as you mature as a leader, you end up adjusting your style or adjusting or knowing, like you said
Yeah,
now, hey, this person's not getting it. Let me adjust and see if they receive it this way. In the military, obviously, we can be a little hard, especially in deployment settings. But
mhm.
yeah, no, it's definitely a good point.
And I think that comes with learning, or not learning, but being an approachable leader. I think that's incredibly
Yeah.
important. Your guys can't feel like they can't go to you,
Yep.
and the more they feel like they can go to you, the more they will,
Right.
and the more they do go to you and voice, respectfully their opinions and their concerns, the more you get to know them,
Yeah.
right?
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
that's
off.
fine.
Like, so I think some people take, I've seen this. Like, they think approachable. They think it's your buddy. They're not your
Mhm.
buddies. Like, you know what I mean? It's your responsibility to your subordinates, whoever you're leading.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is to be the approachable, empathetic, but you are professional, right? Is you are still, there's got to be that has to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, there's rank for a reason, right?
Right.
Um, sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and sometimes you give the orders, sometimes you take the orders, and that's
Yep.
just part of it. But moving on to another key component is just effective decision making. That's huge.
Yep.
That's absolutely huge, and ultimately, it's on you to make sure that you're making the best decision, not for you, but the best decision for your team.
But also making the decision. So I've seen so many times, I'm sure you have too, Den, like probably the most ineffective leadership is the people that do not make a decision, good, bad, or indifferent. You need to make a decision as a leader and own it. Like you said it earlier, right? You got to own it. No matter what happens, you own that decision. But some of the most ineffective leadership is leaders who will not make a decision. They'll be like, let me see, or think about it too much, or put it on someone else in the worst case scenario.
That's the worst, yeah.
Yeah, worst case scenario, of course.
Yeah, and the hardest part about making any decision, whether it's leading others or not, but you got to be able to weigh the outcomes. And sometimes, like in particular overseas, in tough situations, right? You have to make decisions, like split decisions.
Yeah.
And you can't second guess those decisions. You just gotta make a decision, run with it, and know that made the right decision, or the best decision that you could at the time.
And that's where preparation comes in, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because I feel like people just think leadership is this leadership. No, you got to prepare. Especially, let's talk about deployment, because we can relate to that the most, and a lot of our audience probably can too. But
Yeah.
like before you going over into a theater of operation, like you're gonna prepare. And like my first one to Iraq, I mean, I was on that call website. I digested every little bit of information there was out there to what was going on over there. Tactics, tactics, and procedures that the enemy was using on us, and what we were doing to counter that and stuff like that. And to make sure that I was going to be the best leader that I thought at the time, to be able to make those decisions. If you don't have the information, you can't make decisions. So you have to be an informed leader. You have to definitely do your homework and really work hard to be able to make those split-second decisions correctly.
Yeah. And another thing too is you need to be able to, if you're making these decisions on the behalf of others, or you're leading people, you have to know what it's like or feel like to be in their shoes, right? And that's one thing I think the military does well. Maybe with the exception, I've always had somewhat of an issue with like the officer thing with, you just get out of West Point, so now automatically you're leading a platoon of infantry soldiers.
But to cut you off there, I don't mean to.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, he's like, so if you get a good officer in that position, they should listen to their senior NCO.
The good ones will.
That's what I'm saying.
The best ones definitely will, and we were fortunate to get one of those.
We did.
Mike Mondello, love you, buddy.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were fortunate enough to get one of those. But my point is, like, one thing I think the military does particularly well is that you work your way up, especially through the enlisted ranks, right? You have to have done that job prior. But on the civilian side, you can know somebody and get bumped up to a position, never have been in your subordinate's shoes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's just very, very different. So I think,
you can't relate.
Yeah, but it puts you in a position to lack empathy because you don't know what it's like to be them. And I think that compromises your ability to lead, right? If you can't relate to the guys that you're in charge of, then
well said.
You shouldn't be leading. But unfortunately, like I said, in the military, I think they do a good job of making sure that you come up through a certain process, and then you kind of earn your way. You kind of earn your status and your ability to lead the people that you're in charge of because you've done it before. And in the civilian side of things, you see it where those particular steps and processes skip.
How about in the sales world? I just want to talk to you about that, Dan. How does that look in the sales world from your experience? Well, I mean, that's what you know. Do you see people skipping those steps? Like, do they not exist at all?
So no, and there are steps. Like there are like levels of within the sales structure, I guess if you want to call it that. And so the best leader that I've ever seen in what I do now is, I told the story in I think episode 1 of going to Oracle. The guy that helped me get in there, his name's also Mike. He helped me get into Oracle. He started right out of college at Oracle. I think he started as like a business development rep, as like just setting up meetings for salespeople. But now he's like a GVP or an RVP. He's worked his way up through the ranks.
You gotta break that down for me, man.
That makes sense. So he started as like a business development rep. So his job was to
I got that.
Find leads.
It's the other.
Yeah, no. So then he became a manager of salespeople, or became a salesperson, then became a manager of salespeople, then became like a director, managing managers, then became a VP, managing directors. Right. So he just worked his way up through the company and basically managed at every level and worked at every level. And that's probably why he's the best leader that I've seen in that company. Not just because he's my friend,
Yep.
but he's hands down the most proficient. Not only with the sales process, but with the technology that we sold. Just the guy knows his stuff, and it's because he puts in the work to know his stuff, and then also just he knows how to be a good leader and be approachable, and all those things that we discussed that are important.
Well, just like you just said, and going back to episode 1 for those of you guys who have been listening to this, talking about how he gave you the information, like what you needed to do to even get in there, and you executed on that.
Yeah, no, he was crucial.
That's cool.
I wouldn't have gotten the job without him, and
But maybe he wouldn't be like that if he didn't do all those things that he did. Maybe he would never give you that advice.
well, my guess is he probably had some good leadership himself that took
Yep.
chances on him or
Right.
gave him opportunities that maybe he deserved or whatever, right?
Yep.
He there's a reason he thinks that way. There's a reason he's a good leader. And hopefully, or most likely, I think, is probably because he's had good leadership. And I think, um, I think that's how it works.
But
You kind of mimic the best leadership you
but
have.
also bad leadership too. So I do want to go on that
Oh, we're
because
getting there. Trust me.
yeah, well, but like you develop your leadership style off the good things you've seen from good leaders, and you definitely avoid the things of bad leaders that you.
Oh yeah, it's like anything else, right? You take what you like and leave what you don't.
Right.
I definitely pulled a lot of stuff from you when I was coming up in the military because I not only did I work directly for you, but even when I became a leader, I was working for you.
Yep.
I worked for you as just an E4, and then I worked for you as a team leader. So, of course, you're gonna pull things from
Should.
from people and leave things that you don't like. You recognize good and bad in any leader.
No, absolutely.
And you know what looks right and you know what doesn't.
Yep.
And what feels right.
Exactly.
So, but I I think the biggest component, and I know this is your biggest component just in life, but as a leader is integrity.
Absolutely. Integrity and always doing the right thing when no one is watching. That's just my life principle. But definitely as a leader,
Mhm.
if you're not doing that, like they're gonna know it. Like even if you never get caught, you never like people know. Like if you're not doing the right thing, you know what I mean? Or eventually they will.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get away with. Well, I've had some leaders that I trusted. Blindly. Like people have told me, and I probably am blindly naive sometimes. If I trust somebody, I trust them, and come to find out they were not what I thought they were. Unfortunately, but it is what it is. You learn and you move on. But yeah, so
And just on that topic too, I think one of the biggest or most important things that a leader could and should do is making sure that they're shielding their guys.
yeah,
And I think in the military, I saw a lot of good. I saw a lot of guys that were so good at keeping their team from getting chewed out by even
hmm
more senior leadership and
yeah,
just taking it, right?
yeah,
And that's what you should do. That's what ownership is all about.
yep,
And one thing I've noticed in the corporate world and in the corporate structures, you don't see that. People don't do that. They
hmm
they're very quick to throw a guy under the bus. Um,
that's horrible.
for his
Yeah,
dude, it's rampant especially in my opinion in the sales culture. It's all based upon does somebody like you? Does somebody think that you're a good worker? If they and it's all based off perception. It's and it, that and the fact that sales is just a results driven business. If you're not selling, you can be out unless they know that you're really trying to do the right things to generate revenue and whatnot. But I will say that I've seen it in that in the corporate structure more than the military where leadership's just not willing to fall on that sword for you. And I've never had that happen to me
yep,
personally. Like I've never been thrown under the bus by my leadership
yep.
for any reason at all, but I've seen it
You've probably seen it.
with
Yeah,
other people
yeah.
just a lot. A lot.
Well, selfish leadership, right? That's not leadership. So
Hmm.
I think they got to come up with another word for what people try to pull off as
Hmm.
leadership, right?
Hmm.
If you're selfish, you're not a leader. I mean, you're not doing the right thing. You're not helping. You're helping yourself. You're serving yourself. You're not helping even the organization that you're part of drive forward because you're not empowering the people beneath you to help that, right?
Yeah.
By being selfish. So yeah, no, great point.
Yeah. And I had this one particular director at Oracle who was just the absolute worst, right? He led based off of fear. You had no product knowledge. Couldn't even do your job as good as you could, but somehow became a director. Who knows how? Some people that are watching will know exactly what I'm talking about.
No.
But just the
Shots being fired here, guys.
Yeah, I don't care. Just such an arrogant, like useless person with a title that you know was able to bark orders and make people feel a certain way through fear, and that's how he led. But he wasn't good. It was, and the reason I bring it up, it was just the worst leadership I've ever seen in my life, militarily or anywhere. It was just so bad, and to lead that way is just not only ineffective but just crazy. But I think it always comes around, right? He eventually got he got caught. Like
Really?
eventually not caught, but he eventually worked for a guy that saw right through it, and he was gone. Like this guy wasn't having it. Like it was easy to figure out that he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about.
Yep.
It was easy to figure out that he didn't know how to he couldn't make the team, never mind in his position, the organization any better.
Yeah.
He was gone 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months he was gone. But that's because he ended up under the right leadership that knew what he really was.
Right.
So,
and probably demanded results instead of fear. And then putting blame on other people. I'm sure that's probably what this guy did. I have no idea the example you're talking about, but that seems to be the MO for those kind of people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And what was interesting about it too, at the time he got pushed out, he was actually delivering results to the business. Like from a numbers perspective, things weren't that bad, but he knew what he was, and he was gone 6 months.
Yeah. See you later.
So that kind of goes into my next, key principle of leadership or key component is motivation and being able to empower the team. He couldn't, but that's obviously very important.
Yeah.
Is in in the military they always say like false motivation is still motivation. it's still motivation, right? It may not be the most effective tool, but you got to find a way, especially in the military when there's so much about it outside of the work that sucks sometimes, like when you're standing around or whatever it is. And yeah, you just got to find a way to keep your guys motivated.
Well, and that's by leading by example, like I think you were talking about earlier. So if, like you said, false motivation, like you may not be motivated, but you should definitely be giving off that energy, that presence, as though you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because no one's, even though they might not be buying it because the situation's that horrible.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But if everyone's down and like, oh, this sucks, and that's being echoed, that's never good. So you definitely want to definitely. You're the guy that's supposed to provide that, right? In one way or the other, you gotta suck it up and and do whatever needs to be done to provide that culture.
And I think what does that the most is understanding what drives them, right? If you understand what drives them and kind of like, so for example, if I'll use the military just because that's kind of what we both relate to is if like one of your guys wants to be promoted to E5 or E6 or wherever you're at and he wants to get promoted, what he needs to do to get there. So if you know that that's a motivating factor for him, then you can kind of use that. You can use that by assigning certain tasks or saying, you know what I mean? Like these are the things that you can expect moving forward in your leadership position or whatever it is.
Taking care of soldiers, right?
Yeah. And again, just understanding what their goals look like, what their motivations look like, and how can you help to get them there? Because their development is ultimately on you, and it translates into how good of a leader you are.
Yep.
So. And this isn't even in my notes, but what's the best example of leadership that you've ever had for yourself?
Oh, good.
And obviously you've had a lot. I mean, you've been in the
Well, I have two.
Yeah.
I have two that I hold really high in my life, and they're both militarily, right?
Sure.
I mean, but in a personal way. So I'll kind of go back because I think we talked about it, and I don't know what episode it was now. We're becoming this podcast. We have a lot of episodes now, but where I was like I was messing my life up. I was fucking my life up pretty good. Even when I was in the guard, I was just going back to the same crowd, and I had a leader literally recognized that and saw potential in me, even though I was not performing, you know, the way I should, and literally plucked me up and pulled me out of that environment. Like, I'm talking like, who does that? Like, in the guard, right? Literally said, hey, you're coming with me. Move me out of the town I was in and move me out to Worcester and have me live with somebody. You know what I mean? And I was just like, wow. And it's always been there for me throughout my entire career, even now. You know what I mean? He's still there for me. And it's just like, for somebody to have that kind of care to do that to people. But obviously, I'm obviously not the only one. Anybody who's ever served under this guy knows that, and knows exactly who he is, because he's you want to talk about engaged leadership? That guy's on always. You know what I mean? And he cares, and you can't fake that. And he's just a man. And then I had another one. When I was kind of dipping down, who kind of pulled me up. Different style leadership. You had one that was really kind of quiet, and I felt like the first one I was talking about, if you let him down, you wanted him to yell at you, but he wouldn't. And then you're like, man, like you felt like you just let down dad. You know what I mean? Like, shit, that feels way worse than someone yelling at you. And the other guy was very over the top, very, in your face kind of thing, but it was for a reason. It wasn't just a bark like some people do. So, I've had two great leaders in the military who kind of kept me going throughout my career, and I just kind of carry those things, 27 years now into it, but those two would definitely be, they're, but best leaderships in my life that I've seen so far.
Yeah. I would say for me too um, there was one there was one particular drill, and at this point, like I kind of wasn't the best soldier. I was like an E3, came into the guard, and wasn't all that gung ho about it. Could not really like, gosh, should I get over the drill this weekend? Like, I wasn't excited about it, and the reason I wasn't excited because I couldn't go active duty. I remember I told this story. So one is also I wanted to go active duty. They let me, whatever. It doesn't matter. But I skipped the drill, and I knew that they were looking for me all weekend, so I like hid. I hid out of like a friend's house.
Yeah.
But I showed up the next month, and I was set to be promoted to E4. And I showed up the next month, and this was our first sergeant at the time. I know you know who he is.
Yeah.
He literally jacked me up against the wall. And you know this guy. He would do it, and he did it.
Yeah.
He jacked me up against the wall and just like, what's your freaking problem, right? What are you doing? He's like, do you realize that you actually have some potential? Like you could be good. And he's like, you're lucky I didn't rip up your orders. He's like, you're getting promoted this weekend. And this time I had no idea. He's like, you're getting promoted this weekend. He's like, I could rip that up and take that away from you. And he's like, but I'm not going to do that. He's like, I want to see what you do from here on out because I know you're better than this. And just for a guy like him to kind of put that kind of effort into you after you just completely screwed him for the weekend, and he had to chase you around looking for you.
So there you go. Like you just said the same thing. I think the key thing between those both leaders is they saw something in somebody and went out of their way to do something for that. You know what I mean? Because I don't know if I demonstrated anything to this guy. You know what I mean? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I sure wasn't trying that hard.
Sure. And I honestly I can't think of anything that I demonstrated to him either. But he could have just been saying I see something in you. Who knows? I don't know. But
that's what I'm talking about. It goes back to another episode where we're talking about your words matter.
Yeah.
I mean, those things will stick with you forever.
Yeah. You know and I will never forget that because it changed the entire trajectory.
Cares. We know that leader. He cares.
Oh, 100%.
He's gone.
Dude, I could text him right now to come over because I need something.
Absolutely.
He'd be here.
Yeah. So
however long
he didn't just say those words and haphazardly.
No,
he meant them.
No, he's not that guy. He would do anything for any of us. Yep. But it just changed the trajectory of my career at the time. And
love it.
I made E5 before guys who had a deployment or two, right? Because I was like, all right, this guy believes in me. I'm going to take all my correspondence courses. I'm going to max out my PT.
Lock in. Yeah.
Like, I had more points than everyone. Yeah. And I was in charge of a guy overseas that had deployed before. And I had never deployed, but I was a team leader in charge of people in Afghanistan. So it was just, I was just very grateful for that. And then I already brought him up earlier, Mike, the guy I worked for at Oracle, another great leader. Just a guy who knows his people, a guy who knows his business, and just recognizes the good in people and wants to help. So
Cool.
those are the best leaders, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The people who seek out the good and the people that want to see the best in you and that want to see you develop and do well. Those are the people who you want to be led by and inspired by.
Yeah. Well said. Amen. That was awesome. I mean, I feel the same. Like, I mean, I only gravitate. We talked about this earlier. We gravitate towards people that genuinely want to help people. Right.
Mm.
That's. I think I've done that my whole life. Didn't know it. Now that's all I'm deliberate. That's what my circle is now. Is just around people that really have good care and want to do good for other people
Yeah.
over themselves. That's what I'm drawn to nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the most important part of being a leader is caring and
Yep.
wanting to see other people do well, and
Yep.
that's what it's about. That really is just what it's about. Yeah. So with that, I'll end with I'm sure a lot of you guys who have been watching, you've been seeing the Thin Blue Ride logo on our template that you see, our canvas or whatever you want to call it. You see the logo for the Thin Blue Ride, and what that is, if you're not familiar, is it's a 501c3. It's owned and founded by a good friend of mine, John Dage.
Good
He's
guy.
yeah, great guy. He's an Army veteran as well. He's a police officer. He's spent I don't know how many years in the military, but he's been a police officer, I think, like 15 years. But he's become a really good friend of mine over the years, and ultimately, what his cause is, he he is a three-time cancer survivor. He's battling cancer now for the fourth time.
Really?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yep.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Sorry, brother.
Yeah, he's a fighter. I mean, he's good. But ultimately, what his foundation does is he raises money so that veterans, first responders, and their families can basically focus on the treatment and getting better and fighting cancer. So he raises money for those families and does his part, and he's done such great work. I really encourage you guys to go check out his website, thinblueride.org. And I've personally donated to just every cause he's ever done because not only is he a great friend, I know he's doing great work, and I know he's gonna kick the shit out of cancer again because that's just the kind of guy he is. But please check that out and please support that cause. Every little bit counts, and yeah, we very much appreciate it. Great guy, great cause. So thank you for that. Um, Thank you as always for tuning in. We I say it all the time. Any time spent with us is very much appreciated. We know that time is valuable, and so we appreciate anytime you check
Absolutely.
us out. So if you haven't already, go ahead, like, subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble, as well as checking us out on Instagram at Be the Standard Podcast for the business page. Denny underscore Paul 12 is my personal page, and Mike Burns 1. And don't also, again, as always, don't forget to check us out on LinkedIn. We post the content there as well. And yeah, thanks so much. We'll see you next time. Appreciate it.
Don't forget, be the standard.
Yes. Yes, there it is.